We saw the kind of offer that Ice Cube made to Caitlyn to play in the Big Three. That is $5 million to play 3 months. Caitlyn Clark's last WNBA playoff game had over 2.6 million viewers, and now we are seeing the ratings dip under 1 million views. And I also just loved the overwhelming response of people that were saying like, oh look, now Caitlyn Clark is gonna get me to watch golf. Caitlyn Clark will be teeing it up at an LPGA Pro-Am in November. This is what one of the tournament heads said. I received your inquiry regarding if our Wednesday Pro-Am will be live streamed anywhere. Unfortunately not. The only way to view would be in person. I will let you know if anything changes, as we do have a lot of people asking the same thing. We are excited to have her with us. Reach out with any other questions and have a great day. Caitlyn Clark playing golf because she looks like a little female Tiger Woods.
When one of the world's richest men suddenly puts $10 million on the table for a basketball player, you know something massive is happening behind the scenes. Elon Musk didn't just throw money at Caitlyn Clark randomly. He was watching. He'd been paying close attention to how she broke record after record while facing systematic criticism from the very league that should have been celebrating her. A lesser entrepreneur might have stayed silent, but Musk saw something that forced him to act. A generational talent being actively held back by the organization she plays for. His $10 million offer wasn't just an endorsement deal. It was a public statement. It was him saying out loud what industry insiders had been whispering privately for months. And that move sent shockwaves through women's basketball that nobody anticipated. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover how the WNBA systematically restricted Caitlyn Clark's earning potential while allowing other players complete freedom. You'll learn about Nike's $28 million contract that came with zero promotional support. You'll see the trash talk campaign designed to undermine her credibility. And you'll understand why Elon Musk's intervention might have just changed everything about how professional women's basketball operates. This is the untold story behind the headlines. When Elon Musk made his $10 million offer to Caitlyn Clark, it wasn't some casual gesture from a billionaire looking to make headlines. It was a calculated, strategic move designed to force a conversation that the WNBA had been desperately trying to avoid. Musk had been paying attention all season long, watching as Clark broke record after record while simultaneously facing criticism that seemed almost coordinated in its intensity. He observed how she transformed the league's viewership numbers, how she packed arenas, how she created a cultural phenomenon around women's basketball, all while the league's establishment appeared to resent her for doing exactly what they'd always wanted. What made Musk's intervention particularly significant was the timing and the publicity. This wasn't a quiet endorsement deal negotiated behind closed doors. This was a very public, very bold statement made at a moment when tensions between Clark and the WNBA establishment were reaching a boiling point. Musk essentially said to the world, "I'm watching what's happening here, and it's wrong." That's the kind of validation that matters when you're a young player facing resistance from your own organization. The WNBA had been operating under the assumption that they controlled the narrative around Caitlyn Clark. They had contracts, they had leverage, and they had institutional power. What they didn't anticipate was that someone like Elon Musk, someone with even more power, more resources, and a platform of hundreds of millions of people on X, would publicly call out their treatment of their biggest star. That fundamentally shifted the power dynamic in ways that the league wasn't prepared to handle. Understanding why Musk made this move requires understanding what he was observing. Clark wasn't just performing well. She was revolutionizing the sport. She was pulling viewership numbers that the WNBA had only dreamed about. She was creating conversations at dinner tables across America about women's basketball. She was inspiring young girls to consider professional basketball as a viable career path. And the response from the WNBA and certain veteran players was to restrict her, undermine her, and prevent her from capitalizing on her success. To Musk, that represented a fundamental injustice that needed to be addressed. The offer also exposed something that had been brewing beneath the surface of professional women's basketball for years: resentment. There were people within the WNBA who seemed threatened by Clark's rapid ascension. They'd spent years building their own brands, fighting for recognition, and suddenly here was a rookie who was getting more attention than all of them combined. Rather than celebrate what she was doing for the sport, certain players and league officials appeared determined to diminish her achievements and question her legitimacy. Musk's $10 million wasn't just about money, it was about validation. It was him telling Clark that the world was watching, that her talent was being recognized at the highest levels, and that there were powerful people who believed she was being treated unfairly. In many ways, his offer served as a counterbalance to the negativity coming from within the league. It was saying, you're not crazy for feeling restricted. You're not being paranoid about the treatment you're receiving. This is real, and it's being noticed by people outside your organization. What's particularly interesting about Musk's move is that he didn't need to do it. He has no personal stake in women's basketball. He doesn't own a team. He doesn't profit from WNBA success. But he understood something fundamental about fairness and meritocracy. He saw a situation where the most talented player in a league was being prevented from earning what she deserved, and he couldn't ignore it. That's the kind of intervention that matters not just financially, but culturally. The WNBA's response to Musk's offer revealed a lot about how threatened the league establishment felt. Rather than acknowledging that Clark deserved more money, more freedom, more support, critics immediately started suggesting that other players like Aja Wilson, Nafi Sacklier, and Brianna Stewart were equally deserving of such recognition. But that was a misreading of what was happening. Musk wasn't saying those other players weren't talented. He was saying that one specific player had transformed an entire league and deserved to be recognized for it.
Unrivaled basketball account had liked a comment that was seemingly throwing shade at Caitlin Clark. Somebody said, "Please no CC, we've all had enough of her fan base, let us breathe." The Unrivaled basketball account also liked that comment.
There's also a fascinating subtext to Musk's involvement that relates to the broader conversation happening on social media. As the owner of X, Musk had a front row seat to how people were discussing Caitlin Clark's treatment. He saw the outrage from fans. He saw the support from unexpected quarters. He saw a clear injustice. And he decided that his platform and his resources should be used to address it. In doing so, he effectively became an advocate for fairness in professional women's sports. One thing that shouldn't be overlooked is that Clark hadn't even publicly accepted Musk's offer. But that's exactly the point. He made the offer anyway, knowing that it would force a conversation regardless of whether she took the money. He put the WNBA's hypocrisy on full display without needing her to participate in the validation of his gesture. The offer itself was the statement. Whether she accepts or declines, the intervention has already changed how people view her treatment and how they think about the league's decisions. That's the real impact of the offer, not the money itself, but the accountability it created. To truly understand why Elon Musk's offer matters, you need to understand the statistical reality of what Caitlin Clark has accomplished. These aren't inflated numbers or cherry-picked achievements. These are verifiable, historic records that prove beyond any reasonable doubt that we're watching a once-in-a-generation talent perform at an elite level. The numbers are so extraordinary that they demand explanation, and that explanation is simple. She's that good. Let's start with the viewership numbers, because they tell the most compelling story about Clark's impact. Her most recent playoff game pulled 2.6 million viewers. To put that in perspective, that's a number the WNBA hadn't seen in years. That's not the average WNBA game. That's a historic viewership number for women's professional basketball. It happened because one person stepped on the court, and suddenly millions of people who weren't paying attention to women's basketball decided to tune in. That's transformational influence that can't be explained away or minimized. When you look at the year-over-year growth, the picture becomes even more dramatic. Regular season viewership jumped 180%, not 18%, 180%. That's the kind of growth that typically takes a league an entire decade to achieve through gradual, incremental improvements. Draft day viewership exploded by 400%. Ticket sales climbed 93%. These aren't marginal improvements that might be attributable to marketing or random chance. These are seismic shifts in audience engagement that are directly attributable to one player's presence in the league. The individual records Clark has set are equally staggering in their scope and significance. She holds the record for most points by a point guard in a season in WNBA history, most double-doubles by a rookie guard in WNBA history, most points by any rookie in WNBA history, most assists by a rookie. She became the first WNBA rookie ever to record 2 triple-doubles in a season, the first player in league history to have 20-plus points, 15-plus assists, and 5-plus rebounds in a single game. She won Rookie of the Month 4 times in her first season, a feat that seemed nearly impossible. Then there are the records that show her speed of progression. She reached 100 three-pointers faster than any player in WNBA history, 34 games. She's the fastest player to reach 350 points and 150 assists to start a season, regardless of years in the league. She received 700,000 fan votes for the All-Star Game, the most ever in WNBA history by a wide margin. Other players take full careers to accumulate some of the statistics that Clark has already assembled in her first season. The speed at which she's breaking records isn't just impressive, it's historically unprecedented. What's particularly telling about these numbers is that they're not subjective. They're not opinions or analysis or commentary. They're verifiable facts that exist in the official record books of the WNBA. You can't argue with statistics. You can't question whether these records actually happened. They did, and they all belong to one player in her rookie season. That's unprecedented in professional basketball. The comparison that keeps emerging whenever people discuss Clark is inevitable. She's playing like Larry Bird, like Steph Curry, like LeBron James. Those aren't casual comparisons or hyperbolic commentary. Those are references to the most transformative players in basketball history. People who didn't just excel within their league, they changed their league. They elevated their teams. They attracted fans who hadn't previously cared about the sport. They created cultural phenomena around their play. When you compare Clark's rookie season to the early careers of those players, the parallels are striking. She's not just exceeding rookie expectations, she's exceeding expectations that would be reasonable for a veteran all-star player. She's doing things in her first year that most players never do in their entire careers. That level of performance doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because of luck or timing. It happens when you have a genuinely exceptional talent who's performing at an elite level. One of the most revealing statistics is the impact she has on winning, despite acknowledging that she has record turnovers, which makes sense given her aggressive playing style and high usage rate. The Indiana Fever are the hottest team in the entire league because of her presence. That's not correlation. That's causation. Her teammates are better because she's on the court. Her team wins more games because she's playing. That's the mark of a truly great player who elevates everyone around her. The marketing and revenue impact of these numbers cannot be overstated. When you have a player pulling 2.6 million viewers for a playoff game, when you have draft viewership up 400%, when you have ticket sales climbing nearly 100%, you have a revenue-generating machine. Every franchise in the WNBA benefits from Clark's presence. Yet despite generating all these numbers, despite transforming the league's financial prospects, Clark was still making $76,000 as a rookie. That salary structure becomes absolutely indefensible when examined alongside her statistical impact. While the rest of the basketball world was celebrating Caitlin Clark's historic achievements, the WNBA and Nike were quietly constructing a legal and contractual infrastructure designed to limit her opportunities. What happened wasn't an accident or a consequence of standard business practices. It was a deliberate strategy to control her earning potential while preventing her from capitalizing on her fame. And the most infuriating aspect of this situation is that other WNBA players were walking free while Clark remained trapped in restrictive agreements. The evidence of this two-tiered system became undeniable when the offseason began. Other WNBA players started announcing their plans to compete internationally, and the WNBA not only allowed it, they seemed to encourage it. Kelsey Mitchell was heading to China. Nelissa Smith was also going to China. Tamara Benley had a deal in Turkey. Gabby Williams was in Turkey. These weren't rare opportunities or special circumstances. This was standard practice for WNBA players looking to maximize their earnings during the offseason. The WNBA had an unofficial policy: go overseas, make as much money as you can, and come back refreshed for the next season. But when Caitlin Clark was offered opportunities, the response was always the same. No. The Big Three League, a prestigious basketball league featuring some of the NBA's greatest players, made an offer that should have been impossible to refuse. They offered Clark $10 million to play for 3 months, roughly 10 matches. That's not just good money. That's life-changing money for a 22-year-old. She was interested in the opportunity. The WNBA said absolutely not. The rejection wasn't casual or bureaucratic. It was emphatic and total. When Turkey came calling with a $15 million offer, not specifically to Clark, but she would have been allowed to pursue it like other WNBA players had done, the WNBA blocked that too. The EuroLeague had her scheduled to play. Another block. It became crystal clear that there was a specific protocol for Caitlin Clark, and that protocol was fundamentally different from how every other WNBA player was being treated. The official explanation for these restrictions relied on contract language. According to the WNBA and Nike, Clark's agreements with both organizations prohibited her from accepting compensation outside of those contracts. That sounds reasonable on the surface, until you realize that other WNBA players had similar contractual obligations and were still competing internationally without any issues. So the real question became impossible to ignore. Why was Clark being treated differently? The more you examine this situation, the more the hypocrisy becomes apparent. Players with significantly lower profiles than Clark were freely accepting international opportunities. Players who had been in the league for years and had established endorsement deals were still able to pursue overseas competitions. The WNBA appeared to have selective enforcement of these contract provisions, and that selectivity happened to target their biggest star specifically. The most logical explanation for this disparity points to something uncomfortable but undeniable: fear. The WNBA and Nike looked at what was happening with Caitlin Clark and panicked. Every international league wanted her. Every sponsor wanted her. Her influence was spreading globally, and neither the WNBA nor Nike could control it. The only tool they had was contractual restriction, so they deployed it aggressively against her. What's particularly revealing about this strategy is how it contrasts with how professional leagues typically handle their biggest stars. In the NBA, when you have a generational talent, teams and sponsors do everything they can to facilitate their growth. They encourage international play because it builds the player's brand, which ultimately benefits everyone associated with them. They open doors rather than close them. They facilitate earning potential rather than restrict it. The WNBA did the opposite. Rather than supporting Clark's growth and allowing her to maximize her earnings, the league essentially said, "You can only make money through us. You can only play basketball through us. You can only build your brand through us." That's not supportive management. That's controlling management. It's the approach you take when you're threatened by someone's success rather than when you're trying to nurture it. The consequences of these restrictions extended beyond just financial impact. They sent a message to Clark about how valued she really was by her own organization. Yes, we want you to break records and pull in viewers and transform the league, but only on our terms. Only in ways we can control. Only if it benefits us directly. That's fundamentally different from supporting a player's growth and career development. It's about control, not cultivation. Nike's $28 million contract with Caitlin Clark initially sounds like a validation of her importance and market value. On paper, $28 million is an enormous endorsement deal that most athletes would jump at without hesitation. But when you actually examine the structure, the timeline, and the promotional commitment, or lack thereof, the entire contract starts looking less like an endorsement and more like a containment strategy. The more you dig into the details, the more it becomes clear that Nike signed Clark not to promote her, but to prevent anyone else from signing her. First, let's address the basic math because it reveals the real story. $28 million sounds impressive until you divide it by 8 years. That's roughly $3.5 million annually. Now, context matters tremendously here. This is a player who has single-handedly rescued the WNBA from relative obscurity. She's generating hundreds of millions in added revenue for the league through increased viewership, sponsorships, and merchandise sales. She's pulling 2.6 million viewers for playoff games. She's breaking records at an unprecedented pace. When you compare what Clark generates to what she's being paid annually by Nike, the contract suddenly looks significantly less generous and more like a strategic lockdown. Compare that compensation to what Nike pays other athletes for their endorsement deals, and the gap becomes even more apparent. Nike has players who aren't performing at Clark's level, who aren't generating the same cultural impact, who aren't transforming their entire sports landscape, and yet those players are receiving comparable, or in some cases superior compensation. Why? Because Nike is actually investing in promoting them. They're building campaigns around them. They're creating signature product lines. They're making a full organizational commitment to the relationship. And that's where the real evidence of the conspiracy emerges. Nike hasn't released a signature shoe for Caitlin Clark. Think about what that means. You have the most exciting basketball player on the planet wearing your brand. You have unprecedented visibility and interest from a demographic you've historically struggled to reach. You have a generational talent who could generate billions in long-term revenue through signature shoe sales, apparel lines, and accessories. And you don't create a signature shoe. That's not an oversight, that's a decision. That decision reveals the true nature of Nike's relationship with Clark. They didn't sign her because they wanted to support her career and build her brand. They signed her because they wanted to control her career and prevent other brands from building her brand. It's the difference between investing in something and investing in preventing someone else from investing in something. The timing of Nike's signing becomes more suspicious when you consider the competitive landscape. Multiple brands were interested in Clark. Adidas was likely exploring whether they could secure her. Other brands saw an opportunity to position themselves with a generational talent. Nike had to act fast to prevent losing her to a competitor. So they threw $28 million at her, a large enough number to lock her in contractually, while being structured in a way that preserved Nike's flexibility to promote or deprioritize her depending on their other business interests. What makes this situation even more revealing is Nike's apparent loyalty to other players during this same period. There were rumors, and they make a lot of sense based on observable behavior, that Nike was prioritizing Aja Wilson. This creates an interesting dynamic. Nike looked at the competition brewing between Clark and Wilson and made a strategic choice. Rather than fully committing to the player, who is actually transforming the league through her performance, Nike chose to lock in Clark to a long-term contract while continuing to invest more heavily in promoting Wilson. That's a containment strategy disguised as endorsement. It's a way of saying, we're going to tie up the most valuable asset in women's basketball so nobody else can have her. But we're not going to fully support you because we've already committed our marketing resources elsewhere. You're valuable to us, but not in the way we're valuable to our other endorsed athletes. The lack of a signature shoe is particularly telling because it represents a clear line between supporting a player and controlling a player. When Nike commits to a signature shoe, they're making a massive financial investment. They're building factories, manufacturing inventory, creating marketing campaigns, and distributing product globally. It's a visible, concrete commitment to that athlete's brand. By refusing to do this for Clark despite her unprecedented success, Nike is sending a clear message about their true intentions. If Nike had fully committed to Clark, if they'd created a signature shoe line, invested heavily in apparel campaigns, positioned her as the face of women's basketball for their brand, they could be looking at billions in long-term revenue. But that would have required prioritizing Clark over their other endorsed athletes. Instead, they chose control over growth, creating the perfect conditions for external players like Elon Musk to step in and fill the validation gap. The restrictions placed on Caitlin Clark expose a fundamental truth about how the WNBA operates when confronted with unexpected success. The league has spent decades trying to grow, trying to attract mainstream attention, trying to generate the kind of viewership and cultural impact that Clark has now delivered almost single-handedly. But when that success arrived in the form of one dominant player rather than gradual league-wide growth, the response wasn't celebration, it was containment. That tells you everything you need to know about how the league's power structure thinks about talent and influence. The practical reality of these restrictions is almost heartbreaking when you consider the specifics. Caitlin Clark is earning $76,000 per year as a rookie. That's the official WNBA rookie salary. It's not nothing, but it's also not what a player performing at her level should be earning. For context, that's less than what many high school teachers make. It's a fraction of what even average professional athletes earn in other sports. And while earning that salary, she's actively prevented from supplementing her income through legitimate business opportunities that her peers are freely accessing. Meanwhile, her teammates and colleagues around the league are jetting off to China, Turkey, and across Europe during the offseason, securing millions in additional earnings. A player like Tamara Benley, who is nowhere near Clark's talent level, is competing in Turkey and earning significant money internationally. Kelsey Mitchell is in China. Nelissa Smith is in China. These aren't unusual opportunities. They're standard practice for WNBA players looking to maximize their earning potential. Everyone except Clark gets this freedom. The double standard becomes impossible to ignore when you examine specific examples. The Big Three League offered Clark $10 million for 3 months of play. That offer was specific to her. The WNBA blocked it, but had another player received a similar offer, there's reason to believe the league would have allowed it, or at least the player would have had significantly more negotiating power to pursue it. The Turkey offer that came with a $15 million price tag. Why couldn't Clark pursue that when other WNBA players were already competing in that same league without hesitation? The official explanation relies on contract language, but that explanation falls apart under scrutiny. If these restrictive provisions truly applied to all WNBA players equally, then you'd expect to see consistent enforcement across the league. But that's not what's happening. What you're seeing instead is selective enforcement that targets Clark specifically. That pattern suggests the restrictions aren't really about contract compliance. They're about something else entirely. Some current and former WNBA players have openly expressed frustration about this double standard. Their comments reveal resentment that stems from a particular place. They view Clark as getting special treatment in the form of attention and opportunity, even though she's actually being restricted in ways that they are not. The irony is that what appears to outsiders as special privilege, getting all the media attention, being called a generational talent, is actually being experienced by Clark as restriction. She's famous but trapped. She's successful but limited. One of the more revealing statements came from veteran players, suggesting that while they have to care about social issues and use their platform for activism, Clark just gets to play basketball and become famous. The subtext is clear. Why does she get to focus purely on basketball when we're burdened with these other expectations? The answer, of course, is that she doesn't. She's burdened with restriction. But the resentment suggests that some players see her as having an easier path, not realizing that she's actually navigating a different set of obstacles entirely. This situation reveals something uncomfortable about how established athletes in a league sometimes react to rising stars. There's often an assumption that success should be distributed gradually, that new players should earn their respect through time and service to the league. The idea that a rookie could immediately surpass established veterans in terms of talent and cultural impact creates cognitive dissonance. Rather than celebrating it, some players and officials resist it. They build barriers. They question legitimacy. They attempt to diminish the achievement. What's particularly telling is that these reactions often come from players who should be benefiting from Clark's presence. Every time Clark pulls 2.6 million viewers, every other WNBA player benefits from increased league visibility. Every time draft viewership increases 400%, that benefits all players in the league through higher-profile games and more sponsorship dollars. The rising tide should be lifting all boats. Instead, some players seem more interested in resenting the tide than in riding it. This systemic inequality that Clark faces has implications for how other young players will be treated going forward. If the message the WNBA sends is that you can be the most talented, most impactful player in the league and still be restricted in your earning potential and contractual freedom, then what incentive do future generational talents have to join the WNBA? What happened after Caitlin Clark's unprecedented rookie season success followed a pattern that's almost predictable in the world of competitive sports. When someone rises too fast and too visibly, there's often an organized, whether intentional or not, backlash designed to cut them down to size. In Clark's case, that backlash came directly from her own league, her own teammates, and her own professional peers. It was subtle enough to deny, but obvious enough to anyone paying attention that something coordinated was happening beneath the surface. The first sign of this undermining campaign came from veteran players who had established themselves as league leaders. Diana Taurasi, one of the greatest players in WNBA history, made public comments that were designed to diminish Clark's achievements and cast doubt on her longevity in the league. Specifically, Taurasi suggested that Clark was just a fleeting sensation, a temporary phenomenon that would eventually fade as the novelty wore off. This wasn't just casual trash talk between competitors. This was a veteran using her credibility and platform to question whether a rookie's success was actually sustainable or built on a foundation that would inevitably crumble. That kind of statement from a legend carries weight in locker rooms and among fans. When Diana Taurasi, someone with undeniable accomplishments and respect throughout women's basketball, goes on record questioning a rookie's legitimacy, it gives permission to other players to do the same. It creates a narrative where skepticism about Clark becomes acceptable, even if that skepticism contradicts the statistical evidence of her dominance and historic impact. Then there was A'ja Wilson, who became one of Clark's most prominent rivals both on and off the court. Wilson didn't just compete against Clark on the basketball court. She actively sought opportunities to damage Clark's reputation through social media and public statements. Rather than letting their play speak for itself, Wilson appeared determined to construct a counter-narrative about Clark's success. She suggested that Clark's popularity was primarily based on racial demographics rather than basketball talent, a claim that was both inflammatory and factually questionable given the diversity of Clark's fan base. This narrative attack was particularly insidious because it tried to delegitimize Clark's achievements by attributing them to factors outside of basketball skill. If you can convince people that she's only famous because of her race, then her statistical dominance becomes less impressive. The records she's setting become less meaningful. The cultural impact she's having becomes something to be suspicious of rather than celebrated. It's a rhetorical strategy designed to undermine credibility. Angel Reese, another prominent Clark rival, took a different approach, but with similar intentions. Rather than making sweeping statements about demographics, Reese sought to damage Clark's reputation through what appeared to be a coordinated effort to spread narratives and create drama. Her public comments frequently seemed designed to generate controversy and cast Clark in a negative light, regardless of factual accuracy. The trash talk during games elevated to a concerning level. While competitive intensity and psychological warfare are normal parts of basketball, some of what occurred seemed to cross into personal territory. There were allegations of dirty play, with one particularly notable incident where a player allegedly poked Clark in the eye, behavior that, if intentional, would constitute a deliberate attempt to injure rather than compete. Most remarkably, there was the incident involving Unrivaled, the new professional basketball league created by several of the WNBA's biggest stars. When a social media user posted a comment complaining about Clark's fan base, specifically writing, "Please know we've had enough of her fan base. Let us breathe," the official Unrivaled account liked that post. This wasn't a casual social media mistake. This was an official endorsement of shade being thrown at Clark and her supporters. That moment was significant because it demonstrated that the undermining campaign had institutional support. It wasn't just individual players expressing resentment. It was organizations and collective efforts specifically designed to diminish Clark's status and alienate her fan base. When the official account of a professional sports league likes a post attacking a player's supporters, that's a deliberate statement about organizational priorities. What's fascinating about this undermining campaign is how ineffective it ultimately was at its apparent goal. Despite the trash talk, despite the criticism, despite the attempts to damage her reputation, Clark continued to perform at an elite level. She didn't shrink under the pressure or let the negativity affect her play. But that doesn't mean the campaign had no impact. It certainly affected the psychological environment around her. It created tension and hostility in what should have been a supportive professional community. It sent a message that excellence in women's basketball, if it happens too fast, will be resisted rather than celebrated. When Elon Musk made his $10 million offer to Caitlin Clark, he did something that the WNBA establishment apparently couldn't do. He recognized and publicly validated a generational talent who was being systematically undervalued by her own organization. What makes this moment significant goes far beyond the money itself. It represents an intervention from outside the traditional sports establishment that fundamentally shifted the power dynamics around how Clark's treatment was being discussed and perceived by the broader public. Musk didn't have to get involved. By any reasonable analysis, he had no personal stake in whether Caitlin Clark succeeded or failed in professional basketball. He doesn't own a WNBA team. He doesn't profit directly from women's basketball's success. He has no professional obligation to care about this situation. But he made the choice to intervene anyway, and that choice was motivated by something deeper than financial interest. It was motivated by a recognition of injustice and a decision that his platform and resources should be used to address it. What's particularly significant about Musk's involvement is that he forced the entire conversation into the open in a way that previous criticism from within the sport could never accomplish. Before Musk's offer, you could argue that Clark's situation was complicated. Maybe the contract restrictions were justified. Maybe the league policies were standard practice. Maybe there wasn't anything particularly unusual about how she was being treated. Once Musk put $10 million on the table with full public visibility, the conversation shifted entirely. Suddenly, everyone was asking uncomfortable questions. Why is the WNBA preventing one of its most talented players from earning money in the offseason? Why can other players pursue international opportunities, but not her? Why is a generational talent earning $76,000 annually? These questions had existed before Musk's intervention, but they existed primarily in niche sports communities and social media discussions. When someone of Musk's stature and influence publicly validates those questions by backing them up with a 9-figure offer, they move from niche discussion to mainstream conversation. Suddenly, news outlets that would have ignored complaints from women's basketball advocates are running stories about Elon Musk's $10 million endorsement offer. Suddenly, people who don't follow women's basketball are learning about systemic inequality in professional sports. Musk's intervention also shifted the power dynamic in Clark's favor in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to observe. Before his offer, the WNBA held most of the leverage in any negotiation with Clark. They had contracts, institutional power, and the ability to restrict her opportunities. Now, suddenly, there's an external force, one of the world's most influential and wealthy individuals, publicly signaling that he believes in Clark and thinks she's being mistreated. That changes everything about the negotiating landscape. The offer also carries implicit signaling about what could happen if the WNBA doesn't adapt. If Musk is willing to put $10 million on the table for one endorsement deal, what else might he be willing to fund? Could he help finance an international league that pays women's basketball players what they deserve? Could he use his influence to pressure sponsors and broadcasters to demand better treatment of elite players? Could he create an entirely parallel ecosystem? The offer is simultaneously a gesture of support and a subtle threat to the WNBA establishment. Some critics suggested that Musk's offer was unfair to other WNBA players like Aja Wilson, Nafi Sacklier, and Breanna Stewart. They argued that these veterans were equally deserving of such recognition and financial support. But this critique misses the entire point of what Musk was doing. He wasn't making a comparative statement about whose talent was most valuable. He was making a statement about systematic inequality and unfair treatment. Wilson isn't being prevented from accepting international opportunities. She's not locked into a restrictive endorsement deal that prevents other brands from supporting her. She's not being undermined by her own league's establishment. Clark's situation was unique in its unfairness. That's what Musk was addressing. His $10 million offer validated what many basketball fans had been arguing privately. Caitlin Clark wasn't being treated fairly compared to her peers, and she deserved recognition and support from powerful forces outside the traditional league structure. The offer also matters because it validates what many basketball fans and observers had been arguing privately. Caitlin Clark is being treated unfairly. His gesture is a signal that forces outside the WNBA are paying attention and willing to intervene when they see injustice happening. That's powerful validation for a player who's been facing systematic resistance from her own organization and peers. When you step back and examine everything that's happened with Caitlin Clark over her first season in the WNBA, what emerges is a portrait of a sports league that has been fundamentally unprepared for its own success. The WNBA has always wanted mainstream attention. They've spent decades fighting for visibility, for sponsorship, for respect within the broader sports landscape. They've created marketing campaigns, negotiated broadcast deals, and invested heavily in trying to grow the league's profile. But when that success finally arrived, it came in a form they hadn't anticipated and couldn't manage. Concentrated in a single player who became so dominant that she essentially became the league. That's a management problem, and it's specifically a leadership problem at every level of the organization. The WNBA's response to Clark's unprecedented success should have been celebratory and supportive. Every franchise should have been excited that one of their players was generating 2.6 million viewers, that draft viewership was up 400%, that ticket sales were skyrocketing. That growth benefits everyone in the league. It benefits owners, players, broadcasters, sponsors, and every other stakeholder in women's basketball. A competent leadership structure would have recognized this and done everything possible to support and encourage Clark's continued dominance. Instead, the WNBA's response has been to restrict her, control her, and prevent her from capitalizing on her success. That's not growth strategy. That's scarcity thinking. It's the mentality of an organization that believes there's only so much success to go around, and if Clark gets too much of it, there won't be enough left for everyone else. But that's not how professional sports actually works. When one player excels at a historic level, it raises the entire league. It creates interest that spills over to other games, other players, other franchises. The systemic problems revealed by Clark's situation extend beyond just her individual treatment. They reveal a fundamental failure of the WNBA's leadership to think strategically about the league's future and trajectory. The salary structure, which pays a rookie like Clark only $76,000 annually despite her transformative impact, suggests a league that doesn't have proper compensation models for exceptional talent. The Nike deal, structured as a containment strategy rather than a promotional investment, suggests that even sponsors don't know how to properly support women's basketball. The restrictions on international play suggest a league that's so insecure about its own status that it feels threatened by its own players pursuing opportunities elsewhere.
There's a league with players that feel like they should be getting the attention. Now they have center stage, but the ratings are going to go down. Are they going to be pointing fingers and blaming Indiana Fever fans and Caitlin Clark fans whenever the ratings don't stay the same?
Yeah, they will. Hey, look at the numbers everywhere else across women's basketball. It's not just Caitlin Clark, it's all of us. And then the moment the ratings tank, they're going to come back and say, see, we were right all along. It's all the racists that follow Caitlin Clark that were watching the product, and now they're gone, and we're back with our diehards. It is bad news for the WNBA that she's not continuing.
What needs to happen for women's basketball to reach its potential is a complete rethinking of how the WNBA operates at every level. First, the salary structure needs to evolve dramatically. There should be significant salary increases for star players, performance bonuses tied to viewership and revenue generation, and equity structures that allow players to benefit directly from the growth they create. Clark shouldn't be earning $76,000 annually. She should be earning millions based on her impact. Second, the contractual restrictions that currently limit players like Clark need to be reconsidered entirely. If a player is good enough and famous enough to attract international offers, allowing them to pursue those opportunities during the offseason would benefit the WNBA in the long run. It would allow players to earn fair market value for their talent. It would prevent the situation where the league's best players feel trapped and undercompensated. And it would demonstrate confidence in the WNBA's ability to retain players because it's the best league. Third, there needs to be an organizational culture shift towards celebrating and supporting elite talent rather than resenting it. The trash talk campaign, the undermining from veteran players, the institutional shade throwing, all of this indicates a league that's struggling with the reality of generational talent arriving and immediately dominating. That's not healthy. A professional sports league should celebrate when a player reaches historic levels of performance. Fourth, sponsors and partners like Nike need to actually commit to supporting the athletes they endorse. Nike's approach with Clark, signing her to a massive contract but providing minimal promotional support and no signature shoe, suggests that even major brands don't fully understand how to invest in women's basketball. That needs to change immediately. The alternative to these systemic changes is what we're already seeing: a talented, driven, frustrated player who feels trapped by restrictions and undervalued by her own league. Eventually, that leads to resentment and players looking for ways around the system. One of the most frustrating and revealing aspects of the Caitlin Clark story is how certain commentators, athletes, and analysts have attempted to reduce her unprecedented success to racial categories, rather than evaluating it on the basis of pure basketball talent and performance. The narrative that emerged suggested that Clark's popularity was primarily driven by demographic factors rather than by the fact that she's performing at a historically elite level. This reductionist approach not only misses the point, it actively undermines legitimate discussion about her achievements and her treatment by her league. Let's start with the obvious. The WNBA has had many white players throughout its history. Sue Bird was white. Elena Del Don is white. Brittany Griner has competed alongside Clark in the league. The league has never lacked for talented white players. Yet somehow, none of them generated the kind of mainstream attention that Caitlin Clark has generated in her first season. The difference isn't racial demographics. The difference is that Clark is performing at a level that transcends demographic categories and appeals to basketball fans across all backgrounds. The specific allegation made by some critics was that Clark's popularity was primarily because of her race, that people were supporting her because of her identity rather than because of her talent and performance. This claim is not only offensive, it's factually incorrect based on observable evidence. If popularity were determined primarily by race, then we should see white players consistently dominating women's basketball viewership over time. We don't. We see the best players dominating viewership, regardless of race. What's particularly revealing is that the data doesn't support this racial narrative at all. When you actually examine Clark's fan base, it includes significant numbers of Black supporters who understand basketball at a sophisticated level and appreciate Clark's talent specifically. They're not casual fans being swayed by demographic identity. They're basketball enthusiasts who recognize that Clark is performing at an exceptional level and deserve to recognize excellence when they see it. To suggest that Black fans are supporting her because she's white is both condescending and demonstrably false. The argument also ignores historical context entirely. There are legendary Black women's basketball players who came before Clark: Cynthia Cooper, Diana Taurasi, Sue Bird, and many others. These players were exceptional. Some of them won multiple championships. Some of them changed the game significantly, yet none of them generated the kind of sustained mainstream attention that Clark is generating. Why? Because Clark is performing at a level that exceeds what even these legendary players accomplished as rookies. Her statistical dominance is historic and undeniable. That's what's driving the attention. When you look at the actual comparisons being made about Clark, they're not to other white women's basketball players. The comparisons are to Larry Bird, to Steph Curry, to LeBron James. Those are references to the most transformative players in basketball history, regardless of race. The comparison isn't she's the best white women's basketball player. The comparison is she's the best player, period, playing at a level that only the greatest players in history have achieved. That's a completely different statement. One of the more revealing moments came when someone actually acknowledged this reality while still trying to maintain the racial narrative. They said that yes, Clark's race might play a nominal factor in her popularity the way it might with any athlete, But the primary reason she's becoming the biggest star in women's basketball is that she's genuinely, undeniably that good. She's performing at a level that commands attention regardless of demographic factors. That's the honest assessment. What's particularly frustrating about the racial narrative is that it distracts from the actual issues worth discussing. The real story isn't about Clark's race. It's about systemic inequality in how she's being treated compared to her peers. It's about contractual restrictions that don't apply to other players. It's about a $28 million Nike deal with zero promotional support. Those are the substantive issues worth examining. By attempting to reduce Clark's success to racial demographics, critics were essentially trying to delegitimize her achievements. If you can convince people that she's only famous because of her race, then her statistical dominance becomes less impressive. The records she's setting become less meaningful. It's a rhetorical strategy designed to undermine credibility. Some commentators tried to argue that Clark's privilege, whether economic, social, or racial, gave her advantages that other players didn't have. That's a fair point worth discussing. But it's not relevant to the question of whether she's the most talented basketball player in the WNBA right now. It's not relevant to compensation fairness. Those are separate issues about merit and fairness in sports. As we arrive at the end of this comprehensive examination of the Caitlin Clark situation, it's important to acknowledge what's really at stake in the coming months and years. The WNBA is at a genuine inflection point in its history. The league has an unprecedented opportunity to do something it's never done before: fully embrace and support a generational talent from the moment she arrives, giving her the resources, the promotional support, the contractual freedom, and the cultural respect that someone performing at her level deserves. Alternatively, the league can continue down its current path and risk losing not just one player, but the entire momentum that Clark has created for women's basketball. The decision about what comes next doesn't ultimately rest with Clark alone. It rests with the WNBA leadership, with team owners, with Nike and other sponsors, and with veteran players who need to decide whether they're going to support or undermine the sport's ascension to mainstream relevance. Every stakeholder has a choice to make. Do you want women's basketball to reach new heights of popularity and financial success? Or do you want to preserve existing hierarchies and power structures, even if it means limiting the sport's potential dramatically? What Elon Musk's $10 million offer fundamentally did was shift the timeline on this critical decision. Before his intervention, the WNBA could have claimed they were operating normally, following standard protocols, treating all players fairly and equally. After his intervention, those claims became untenable. Everyone now knows that there's an injustice happening. Everyone now knows that the world is paying attention. And everyone now knows that there are powerful external forces willing to back up that assessment with money and significant influence. The immediate question is whether Clark will accept Musk's offer. But that's actually the less important question in the bigger picture. The important question is what the acceptance or rejection of that offer will mean for how women's basketball evolves going forward. If Clark accepts, it signals that she's open to opportunities outside the traditional WNBA structure, and that might inspire other generational talents to make similar choices. If she declines, it might be because the WNBA has made sufficient changes to show that they're committed to supporting her properly. More broadly, the WNBA needs to make systemic changes that address the fundamental issues revealed by Clark's situation throughout her rookie season. The salary structure needs to be completely revamped to compensate star players according to their actual market value and impact. Right now, the salary ceiling is so low that even the best player in the league is earning less than $250,000 annually. That's absurd for a player generating hundreds of millions in added revenue. That needs to change urgently. The contractual restrictions that limit international opportunities need to be reconsidered completely. If players are good enough to attract offers from international leagues, letting them pursue those opportunities would benefit everyone. It would allow players to earn fair market value. It would prevent resentment from players who feel trapped. It would demonstrate confidence in the WNBA's quality. Nike needs to actually commit to supporting the players they endorse with real promotional investment. If Nike is going to sign a player to a massive contract, they should be building signature product lines, investing in marketing campaigns, and treating them like the star athletes they are. Right now, the strategy appears to be signing Clark to a big contract while giving minimal promotional support. That's not sustainable. The culture within the WNBA needs to shift from resentment of excellence to celebration of it. Veteran players should be using their influence to support rising stars, not to undermine them. League officials should be creating an environment where generational talents want to stay and build dynasties, not an environment where they feel restricted and undervalued. Most fundamentally, the WNBA needs to recognize that women's basketball's future depends on embracing what Caitlin Clark represents. She's not a threat to the league. She's the solution to problems the league has been trying to solve for decades. She's the mainstream attention the league always wanted. She's the proof that women's basketball can generate elite-level excitement and viewership. The alternative is that women's basketball risks losing its biggest opportunity in history. If Clark becomes frustrated enough with the WNBA's restrictions and the establishment's resistance, she could decide to pursue opportunities elsewhere. She could play in international leagues that would welcome her with open arms and massive financial packages. She could step back entirely. Any of those outcomes would be a massive loss for women's basketball and the sport's growth trajectory. What Elon Musk's offer represents is a chance for the WNBA to step up or step back. It's an invitation to do the right thing, backed up by the threat that if the league doesn't, there are powerful external forces willing to create alternative opportunities. The league has a limited window to demonstrate commitment to supporting Clark the way she deserves. The story of Caitlin Clark and the WNBA's response to her unprecedented success is ultimately a story about whether a professional sports league can recognize and properly support generational talent when it arrives. For most of her first season, the answer appeared to be no. The league restricted her earning potential. Nike provided minimal promotional support despite signing her to a massive contract. Veteran players undermined her achievements, and the organizational culture seemed designed to contain her rather than celebrate her. Then Elon Musk stepped in with $10 million and shifted everything. He forced the entire establishment to confront the reality of what was happening and what it means for women's basketball's future. His intervention was simultaneously a validation of Clark's immense talent and a criticism of how she was being treated by the sport's existing power structures. The next chapter of this story will be determined by how the WNBA responds. Will they continue restricting their greatest asset, or will they embrace what Caitlin Clark represents? Will they maintain salary structures that undervalue elite talent, or will they evolve to compensate players according to their actual impact? Will they create an environment where generational talents feel supported and celebrated, or will they continue building barriers? Women's basketball's future depends on getting these decisions right. Caitlin Clark has already proven she's worth the investment. The only question now is whether the WNBA is wise enough to recognize it before it's too late.